And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
Yo, Lord Willin, Jeff Canarsie, Mob Talk Radio. Check it out. Yo, we stay quiet like Russell Buffalino when things will get ugly like Pepsi's death in Casino. Who do we know? No one, nobody. But we're all well respected like Della Croce and Gotti. I know wild nights, Havana nocturne. Light up a cigar and watch your spot burn. You'll get patty whacked. I'm tough like Irish dock workers. Rubber guys, rubber guys.
And welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I am your host, Jeff Canarsie. Today we got a large Q&A, and we're going to digest the Havana Conference. And the reason why I decided to do that versus, say, a biography on a mobster is because I'm getting a lot of questions about the Havana Conference, and I think that there's a lot of confusion over what the conference is about. And I don't think people understand the historical implications of what that conference was. And it led to a lot of things. And ultimately, it would lead to Vito Genovese, his rise, but it would also pretty much lead to his fall in the same sentence. So we're going to talk all about that today. But before we get started, I wanted to talk about a couple things. Number one, I do have a book that is being written right now. It's probably 3/4 done. It's about a lot of different things. It's sort of how I got involved in the mob talk genre as far as the radio show, and everything that sort of happened in between. There is stuff in this book that you will not hear anywhere else. It's not really anybody that's looking for this to be explosive in a sense would be wrong. There are some explosive things in the book. I do talk in depth about the Joey Merlino trial. I do talk about the Stephen Crea trial. There are reasons why I do discuss that. And sort of everything that's sort of happened in between when I started doing this show up until now. And there's been some crazy stuff. I will talk about the Narducci trial. I will talk about the FBI coming after me twice. There's a lot of different stuff that I'm going to cover in the book. Some things I'm obviously not going to get into on this platform about what's going to be in the book, because if I give it all away now, nobody's going to want to read the fucking thing. But I have given some sample chapters to some people that I do know to look over, and they all seem to enjoy it. It covers a lot of topics, a lot of different things. So on one part, you're going to have me talking about how I got to where I got doing this, some things that happened in between all of that. And we're going to talk about a lot of mob type of stuff. You're going to see a lot of famous names in it. Some people I do know, some people I don't. And it's going to be a bit of everything in between. And I'm sure it's going to cause, in some ways, a big response from a lot of different people. Not just because it's a book and it's talking about the mob genre, but I talk about certain things that I think a lot of people aren't willing to talk about. It's not a matter of talking about a guy and putting his information out there. It's not like that. It just involves discussing the things that I think a lot of authors and a lot of mob genre-oriented people are afraid to talk about. Government misconduct is a big part of this book. So you're definitely going to want to keep paying attention to that. I don't think, looking at it now objectively, I don't think the book's going to be out in the next month. I am shooting for just tail end of the summer because there's a lot of editing that has to go in. And I also have to get a couple of people that I am discussing to kind of sign off on things just because I don't want to step on toes. But there will be some explosive stuff in the book that only I have been able to sort of acquire through my own channels, and I think it's going to surprise a lot of people, some of the things that I have to say. We're going to talk about Anthony Center, who I knew, Angela Clemente, Joey Merlino, Phil Narducci, Stephen Crea, Matty Madonna, Sammy Gravano, a whole bunch of people. And I think some of the stories can only be told in the way that I could tell them. Rather than take sort of the PR approach to it, I'm going to go balls out like I always do with everything else that I do. Now, okay, for the second part of this, we are moving to a pay platform. Some people knew that I was going to do this. We are going to make the jump. I'm not going to tell you what platform that is going to be on because right now, with this fucking pandemic that's going on, I may have to back off of some of that. At least launching from the perspective of a pay site. Now, what's it going to cost? A lot of people are asking me this. It's going to cost $2.50 a month if you pay for 12 months, which rounds it out to $30 a year. If you pay month to month, it's going to be more expensive, $3. You're still going to get the blog for free. That's never going to change. But the radio show will go onto an application that you can download to your phone and listen as you drive, listen as you work, whatever it is you're doing. You might even be whacking somebody. You can listen to it while you're doing that. I am going to leave all of the old shows on YouTube, obviously, but a lot of the new stuff is going to go over to the platform. Now, along with this platform, the other thing we're going to do is live shows. The only way that you will be able to access that is if you join. If you don't join, we have things put in place where you can't download it and share it with your friends. It's only going to be downloadable to 1 or 2 platforms at a time, obviously with a password protected and all that kind of good stuff. Like I said, we're going to do live shows, and we're also going to do a call-in feature. One of the unique things that I've been working on with this company is a way that we can bring you the show and have a call-in number so that people can call in where it doesn't come to my fucking phone. I really don't need everybody and their mother calling my fucking phone. So there will be like a number that you could call in, and we will do live shows. Live feeds. And one of the other things that we're going to do is start doing live show feeds as far as video goes. We have a lot of interviews lined up. There's a lot going on with this project, and it's not as simple as just launching a fucking web page and just go ahead and doing it. There's a lot of legal stuff that comes to this, and I also wanted to make sure that I could keep some of the assholes that continuously start this shit to keep them at bay. I will have the availability when people pay for the platform to deny them. So if you try to use a fake credit card, it's not going to work. If you try to use a prepaid card, it's not going to work. It has to be your name. This way we can sort of logistically take the people that are continuous shit stirrers and keep them the fuck off the page. But it's going to be good. It's going to be totally interactive. Live shows, live call-ins, special guests. And it's relatively cheap. When I started looking at everybody else who does this kind of thing, they're all charging $5, $10, $7 a month. That's ridiculous. It will be available on all platforms through this company, but you still can't get it unless you pay. That's kind of going to be the way it's going to go. When you sign up, like I said, it's going to be $250 a month. $250 a month for the whole entire year, so it rounds out to be $30 per year. Rollover billing. However, if you elect not to sign up for a year, it's going to be $3 to $3.25 per month per show. With that, you're going to get 4 shows, 5 shows a month. You're going to get access to some videos, some documentary stuff. You're also going to get access to the live shows and live call-ins and etc. And I know that people automatically are going to think, well, we can sneak it in and do a live call-in even if we're not paying for the show, but there is something in place where you're not going to be able to do that. So all that being said, that's what we're going to do moving forward. I do not know when this is going to start. Originally, I was going to come out of the gate the first or second week in March, and that's what we was going to do. But I think because of this coronavirus bullshit, we may have to back it off because, right now people are freaking out. They're spending their money on groceries, toilet fucking paper, and other things. So we have to be conscious of what the economy is. We have to be conscious of what people can afford. So that may be backed off just a bit. Also, we have T-shirts for sale, coffee mugs. A lot of people have been asking me, how come there's no Mob Talk Radio coffee mugs? How come there's no Mob Talk shirts? How come there's no gangster gear? We got you covered. If you go to www.zazzle.com/store/mob_talk_radio, you will be able to find our store. I will put links into the show itself. We're already selling shit like crazy. I really honestly, when I set out to do this, and listen, for people that are going to say I'm getting a huge kickback off of this, I don't. I get a percentage off of it. I don't want to go into the percentage that I do get, but I get a kickback per item sold, which isn't fucking much. It's goddamn peanuts. But the point of the matter is that nobody is really making mob shirts like I am at this point. They're a little different. It's not a slogan-based fucking company. It's exactly what it is. It's mob stuff. But right off the bat, we didn't really even officially launch yet, but the page has been launched, and stuff is flying off the shelves from what I've been able to see as far as the inventory and what's been selling. And some people are buying 2 and 3 items of the same fucking thing, which blows my mind. So, we've got things like coffee cups, keychains, shirts, all kinds of different stuff. If you like Roy DeMeo, Joey Merlino, Carmine Persico, we got all kinds of stuff there. The only thing I will not sell is John Gotti stuff. I will not sell Gotti anything on this site. Not that anybody owns the likeness rights or the name rights to that. It's just that I have moved on in a space in my life where I'm just not going to sell Gotti stuff. Not because anybody threatened me, not because anybody said I couldn't, because really, technically, there's a million different companies that are selling Gotti merchandise. I'm just not going to be one of them. You can go get it from another company. It's just not going to happen from here. All that being said, we still are selling the Mob Talk art. I mean, I cannot tell you how many requests I get for personalized items from that respect. Also, you heard it here first. You're not going to be able to get this anywhere else. If you are a fan of Funko Pop art, they make like movie characters, the Godfather set, the Wolfman, TV shows, fucking Big Bang Theory. They're miniaturized collector's items. Queen, the band, has a bunch of them. I do not have a deal with pop art per se, but what I have is my own line coming out of gangsters. You will get Albert Anastasia, Carlo Gambino, Vito Genovese. And so I'm working with a company right now to develop those. Those are not going to be ready anytime soon, so don't send me a bunch of messages asking me for that. This is all about business. It's all about earning and making a dime, and that's what we're trying to do here. Anything that I can do to sort of supplement my income and to supplement what I'm trying to do with the radio show, I'm going to do. And so that's where we're at with all of that. As soon as we get a little further down the road, and I know what's going to happen with this stupid fucking virus, I will begin to let everybody know what we're going to do as far as the pay site for the radio show, the live shows, and everything else. We've got a lot planned. It's just that right now I kind of have to wait and see what the economy's going to do, because it makes no sense to charge for something when, people are fucking hungry and shit in the streets. So, all that being said, that's pretty much what we have going on there. This virus is fucking nuts. I mean, if you guys don't live in New York City, curfew's coming any day now. I'm sure martial law is going to come any day now. It's fucking nuts. They're price gouging for fucking shit paper. Just get yourself a fucking water hose, hook it up to the sink, and spray your fucking ass into the toilet if it's that fucking bad. You know what I mean? Or get one of the nozzle sprayers from fucking, what do you call it, that you have on your sink. I saw some assholes charging $175 to come to your house and install basically a dish sprayer on your toilet to make a homemade bidet. It's ridiculous. I hope that everybody that listens does not get sick. It's some crazy shit that's fucking going on. And I know, and I'd like to say this to all the haters, because I know you were all praying that I would get the coronavirus. I'm hoping not to, but if I do, I'm sure you'll all stand up and give me a round of golf claps. So all that being said, what we're going to do today is we're going to cover the Havana Conference and your Q&A. Once again, if I don't get to your question, it's just because I have way too many questions. There's a million of you who have emailed me. I still have 300 emails I haven't gotten to. I've got 226 messages on Facebook I haven't gotten back to yet. I can only answer like 10, 15 a fucking day, folks. I can't sit here all day and answer each individual question. But if you want to submit a question, usually on Mondays or Tuesdays, go over on Facebook, type in Mob Talk Radio, and message me and send your question, and I'll get to them as I can. All that being said, I'm going to take a break, and when we get back, we're going to get right into your questions. Stay tuned on Mob Talk Radio. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We are going to get right into your questions. If Frank Rosenthal was only an associate of the outfit, why did he ultimately get more protection from Tony Spilotro? The simple answer to that is money, obviously. Lefty Rosenthal pretty much, for the most part, kept Vegas in line for them financially. He was able to handicap like nobody's business, so he was very valuable to the mob in a lot of different ways. But believe me, if Rosenthal couldn't make money, I don't think they ever would have allowed him to function in Las Vegas to begin with. Tony Spilotro, on the other hand, really couldn't rub two dimes together, which is exactly why he started the Hole in the Wall gang to begin with. If he was making a lot of money, then he wouldn't need to break into buildings and steal and pilfer and stuff like that. But left to his own devices with a little bit of small bookmaking and getting kicked out of every casino he was ever in, he really had no choice but to start breaking into buildings and stealing. Rosenthal was also able to ensure that the money was kicked back to everybody that was involved without any issues or hang-ups. The mob always protects guys who earn for them, and money is what makes sort of the wheel go around in that situation. All right, just a quick question. It's a Sopranos question, but just picking your brain a little bit. When Tony went back to Naples with a couple of his crew members when they were doing business, what family was that? Cosa Nostra, or was it Camorra or Ndrangheta? I'm only asking because Naples is controlled usually by the Camorra, and they were not in Sicily. Look, if they were going to portray a group, it probably would have likely just been Sicilian Cosa Nostra. They're located all over Italy, not just in Sicily. They're also in Rome. Ndrangheta's in Rome. Camorra's in Rome. All fringe groups are not really located into one area. But I think in reality, that's likely who they were dealing with. And I don't think really David Chase thought that far out, to be honest with you. I don't think he gave it that much in-depth thought. And it could have been just a small clan, too, at the same time. They never really said, what the group was. But regardless of all of that, I think we could just say it was a mob group. Who it was, what it was, I don't really know, but I'm leaning more towards Cosa Nostra versus Ndrangheta or Camorra. But, logically, when you think about it, when in Rome, it's not just Cosa Nostra, like I said. It could have been any fringe group. And we have to also understand that Italy by nature is very clannish. But, you can form your own opinion here as to who you think it might have been. But for my money, it was just a group of Cosa Nostra, nothing more, nothing less. This is not really a question, more of a statement. This is true, this is true, this is true. I went to dinner at Ristorante Al Caratello on Rue Ardran in Paris, France, and my server asked us literally if we listened to Mob Talk Radio, and then he wanted to know what our thoughts or opinions are of what was going on in Montreal. I swear it's the truth. It completely fucking blew me away. It blows me away, too. It never surprises me, I should say, that people do listen to the show. I've been told that they listen to social clubs and prisons and restaurants overseas, Montreal, Italy. It never surprises me that people tell me they listen to. I mean, it does kind of surprise me in the sense that I'm surprised that many people actually listen to the show. I know there will be detractors who will fucking deny that and say the opposite. But what people have a tendency of not understanding or not totally getting is when you look at my subscribers on YouTube, it may say 10,600, 10,700, but that does not make up for my base. In fact, on the analytics, if you go into it and you look at who's listening from where, locations, it gets down to finite details. 58% of my base is not subscribed to me. Therefore, the 58%, which, you figure 58% is of 5,300 people that are subscribed to me, don't listen to my show. So I'm getting a larger base that isn't subscribed to me. So I don't know exactly how many people listen. I can just tell you that it's over 2 million downloads or 2 million listens a month. It's not really necessarily reflected in each actual show I do, but one day I'll publish like screenshots so people can see what I'm talking about. But it surprises me that people in Paris are listening, but I've been told a lot of people listen. I was also told that guys are somehow getting it smuggled into prison on iPods. I don't know how that's fucking working, but that's just one thing that I was told. All right, Jeff, can you do a show on the Cherry Hill Gambinos and the war with Carmine Galante? Not just on the drugs, but the pizza business war. that they had. I heard that John Gambino owned over 260 pizza spots, that him and Carmine Galante almost came to blows in a meeting. John Gambino he's talking about. Look, I'm thinking about discussing the pizza connection in connection with the Gambinos and both Carmine Galante, because there seems to be a lot to digest and discuss about that, and I will consider doing that. Now, here is a fucking sneak peek, or what do they call it when they come out with a movie or whatever, a spoiler alert. I talk about the pizza connection in my book, and the reason why I do is I know 3 brothers who were involved in it. They all 3 did federal time. One of which wanted to kill a fucking FBI agent. These people that I'm discussing in the book, I don't think any of you have ever heard of. They're real people. I've known them for 20 years. I know their whole entire story, and it's a story that's going to blow your fucking mind, and I can't wait to tell it because I don't think anybody's ever told it before. But it does have to do with the pizza connection as well. Keep in mind, these 3 brothers are all in their 70s. They're all still alive. 2 are in Italy. 1 is down in Florida now. Each one of them is in Sicilian Cosa Nostra. They're all from Sicily. So I will tell that story. All right. Let's see. Was wondering if you knew if Frankie the Cat Angiulo was a made member of Cosa Nostra. I know the story about his brother Gennaro was made by Raymond Patriarca. I also know that his other brother Donato was a made member and known as a tough and fierce character. Other than being a good bookkeeper. We'd love to hear some more about the story of Frank Angiulo. Look, none of the Angiulos earned their stripes on their own. Every single one of them, all 3, were made, and they bought into the mafia. They paid an exorbitant amount of money to join. They did not earn it in the traditional sense where they earned high volumes of money or they killed somebody. These guys bought into the mafia. It doesn't, in any way, it doesn't make them weaker or softer. But they bought into the mob. They didn't earn it the traditional way, but we will talk about them in a New England crime show that I am going to do. All right. Is it true? No, I'm going to skip that one because that's going to be a part of another show. All right. Did you have, all right, this is a question that I said that I was not going to answer on my show, and a large part of it is whatever disagreements I have, whatever misunderstandings that I have, I try not to really go public with it just because it's nonsense and everybody will feed into it. But for the sake of this, I'm going to answer this, and I'm probably going to regret fucking doing it. But I'm going to do it anyway. All right. Did you have a falling out with Angel Gotti? She posted this on Twitter, and I'm going to use air quotes here. I had 2 friends. One is mad at the other, and rightfully so. But who does he take it out on? Me. By attacking my father and my brother? Lying and flip-flopping won't hurt them. It hurts you and your credibility. 2 of them can kiss my ass. Another reason why I love animals more than people. For starters, I don't know if she's talking about me or not. I don't want to put words in her mouth. I would assume she probably is. And I don't want to get specifically into what she is talking about, but I will address one thing. I didn't take anything out on her. I never really have. I think that a larger part of this is that, and I say this with all due respect, I have been on both sides of the Gotti debate. I think that's publicly noted. I'm not hiding from that. I've been on 2 sides of the fence for a long time with that. However, what has a tendency of fucking happening, and it's been 4 years now, what has a tendency of happening is you start to see things that come to light in one way, form, or fashion. You on one hand, you got a lot of government paperwork, and then on the other hand, you got court paperwork, and then you kind of sit back and you watch how things sort of work themselves out on social media. And I just got to the point where I didn't want to deal with it anymore. I didn't want to be like on one side or the other. I just didn't give a fuck. Some things get really old by nature talking about, and that's why I've moved away from it. It's no longer relevant to me. I've got a lot of other things going on. Now, as far as what Angel Gotti is alleging here or saying I did, is I didn't take out anything on her, or let me rephrase that. I didn't attack anybody or didn't say disparaging things about anybody in her family because I had a beef with her or I had a disagreement with her. Her and I were very close at one point in time. That's publicly noted as well. We were very, very good friends. The one thing that I can say is I've always thought highly of her. I've always respected her and treated her in kind, very nicely, right? So, you're going to bump heads. You're going to have disagreements. I don't know specifically what she is talking about. I kind of have an idea. But the whole thing is this, right? So if you're going to do a mob genre show, you have to call things down the middle. I didn't always do that. I'll be the first to admit that that was one of my flaws. I picked a side. I stuck to it. I saw things that were being said about the Gottis I didn't fucking like. There were things that the Gottis were saying about other people I didn't like. Not that that makes them wrong, but I have a right to my opinion. I think anything that I have said has been pretty much public knowledge up to this point, and I've started, essentially calling it down the middle. I think in terms of, and I'm gonna be specific here. I think that if you talk about John Gotti Sr., you can say he was a street guy. He was a tough guy. Those are absolutely known facts and absolutely true things. Was he beloved in Queens? Absolutely. Was he the face of the mafia in this century? Absolutely. These are things we cannot fucking deny. However, there's another side to this. Is Sammy Gravano a liar? Yeah, he's a liar. He's a rat. He's a bastard and all these other things. And I've said that. I've been public about that. But the one thing that we cannot fucking bypass is the fact that John Gotti got caught talking on tapes. It's happened to a million different people. It doesn't make him any different than anybody else that's ever been caught on tapes. But if you are going to do mob genre, you cannot insult the intelligence of your fans. You cannot insult the intelligence of journalists. And you cannot insult the intelligence of mass media. And the fact is, John Gotti was caught on tapes. If he doesn't get caught on tapes, does Sammy Gravano do what he does? I don't fucking know. I don't know what Sammy Gravano was fucking capable of prior to all of that. I know it didn't help things. And then you have to start to look at things. If John Gotti isn't caught on tapes saying things that he probably regretted the rest of his life, does that have a domino effect on the Gambino crime family? Because it wasn't just John Gotti that goes to prison. Sammy goes to prison. He rats out everybody. Frankie Loke goes to fucking prison. And there's 100 people that go to prison as a result. And so I'm not saying that one way or the other, if Gravano did X, Y, and Z, or if Gotti didn't do X, Y, and Z, it would have ended the same way, because I don't have a fucking crystal fucking ball. I can't tell you what would have happened. All I can do is look at the mitigating factors of the case, look at what happened, and say, okay, this happened, then as a result of this happened, that happened. And then because of that, i.e. Gotti talking, Sammy gets caught up in some shit. He rats, okay? So you can't hold John Gotti responsible for everything that Sammy Gravano did, and I never have. But you also have to be realistic to the point where you say, if Gotti doesn't get caught on them tapes, maybe Gravano doesn't do what he does. Then maybe Gravano, in turn, since he does rat, doesn't tell on fucking everybody else. I don't know. We cannot play those odds. We cannot second-guess shit. We cannot, shake the fucking magic 8 ball and go, would this have happened if this happened? No, we just don't know. So I think that she's probably angry with me because I said things like that. And I don't blame her. If we're friends and I got your back and I stick up for you and she stuck up for me, she did a lot of things for me that a lot of people don't know. We were very tight friends. But at the same time, at some point, you got to just call it down the middle and be like, okay, on the left, we got this. On the right, we got this. Does that ruin my credibility? Absolutely fucking not. Because everybody has talked about that. I'm no different than George Anastasia, that piece of shit. I'm no different than Ratweiser. I'm no different than Jerry Capisci. We all do the same kind of thing, right? I'm not comparing myself to them. I'm just saying that you got to call it down the fucking middle. And that's what I've done, and apparently she doesn't like it, and I understand that, and she's perfectly entitled to that opinion. Look, at the end of the day, she's going to defend her family. She has every right to do it. I would do the same thing in my case, so I don't fault her for that whatsoever. I still consider her a friend, even though we don't talk, and she's obviously fucking upset with me, but at the end of the day, I haven't attacked anybody as a result of my frustration with her. And there is another part to this particular issue, and I'm not going to get into it because it's water over the dam, and it's over and it's done with. Just a lot of back and forth stuff with a lot of different people, and it just, it gets to the point where it just gets annoying. It doesn't serve a purpose. If I sat here every day and went, Gotti, people would get fucking infuriated with me. They would get tired of hearing it. So I've sort of moved on from it. But no, I have not attacked John Gotti Sr. or her brother as a result of having a frustration with her over another issue. That's just simply not the fucking case. I have always, for the most part, called it right down the middle with John Gotti, but just lately, because I'm getting a lot of questions about it, is the reason why I'm talking about it more. Usually I bypass those questions just because at some point you got to move on. But that's sort of what the issue was in a small sense. There are other issues, but they're really, at the end of the day, not important, not for public consumption. I'm not going to disrespect her. I'm going to respect her enough to leave it at that. But no, I didn't attack anybody as a result of being frustrated with her. I could be frustrated with fucking Joey Merlino. Doesn't mean I'm going to take it out on his fucking kids. I could be frustrated at Phil Narducci. Doesn't mean I'm going to take it out on his wife. So the reality is that's not what I did, and I'm sorry if she feels that way. That's not the truth. And maybe my book is going to clear up some of that nonsense, because there's going to be some stuff in there that I think is going to surprise some people. Looking back on all of this 4 years later, I have a different perspective on a lot of things. Not to say I dislike anybody or I like anybody, but I'm going to do what I want to do as far as I'm going to call it down the middle. I'm going to call a spade, just like people call me a spade. And without pushing the envelope even further, I'm just going to kind of leave it at that. And that is what it is. It's a shame that we're not friends or whatever the case may be. But that's life. I mean, I can't consistently say the same stuff and expect to be in this business very long. And I hope she understands that. And I hope everybody understands that. Listen, there's going to be some days I'm going to say positive stuff about people, and I'm going to say negative stuff. I haven't always been positive about the Gottis. I think anybody that who has listened to my show in the last couple of years know at one point I was not. So it's not a matter of flip-flopping. It's a matter of I'm changing perspectives. My thought process is changing. And as my show has grown, I had to start sort of looking at the bigger picture and not just little incremental sort of parts of that. So, all right. But if you want to ask her, you can ask her. I just, at this point, it's just we got to move on. All right. How close were Anthony Spilatro and Frank Lefty Rosenthal in real life? I heard their friendship was played up a lot for the movie. It was and it wasn't. The tension was real, don't get me wrong, and Tony Spilatro was sent out there to ensure that Las Vegas went the right way, and it's also true that he banged Lefty Rosenthal's wife. I don't think that they were best buddies at all. It was more of a business relationship than anything, and I think Chicago had the right idea sending Tony Spilatro out there to oversee it. But what Tony ends up doing is creating a whole fucking mess for everybody with his behavior and his antics. Getting thrown out of the casino was a big problem. Fucking Lefty's wife was a big fucking problem. And I think the movie sort of showcases the reality of that life. But I think it's just... And honestly, I think Casino is really closer to the vest as far as history goes of all the films that I've seen. But like with any film, they take liberties, and Hollywood will bastardize the truth. But the fact that the movie shows them hanging around, palling around, really was not the case. All right. I've read somewhere that most of the families outside of New York City go by different names. In New England, they call themselves The Office. Buffalo was The Arm. Kansas City called themselves The Click. Chicago Outfit. Have you heard of any other families using names? No. I mean, listen, they call themselves whatever the fuck they want. At the end of the day, they're still Cosa Nostra. It is what it is. All right. I read that Carlo Gambino once vacationed down in Florida and was wondering to what extent Santos Trafficante would have been responsible for his safety. Absolutely none. Look, Gambino was stronger than Trafficante ever was. Besides, who's going to hurt an elderly old man? Have you seen Carlo Gambino? Does he look very threatening to you? Look, Gambino was quiet. He kept to himself, and he was too strong and too powerful for anybody to even think for 2 seconds that they were going to fuck with him. And I don't think he would have needed protection from anybody. I really don't. Because if anybody laid a hand on that guy, one phone call and the fucking world would end. You think this fucking coronavirus is deadly? You should see Carlo Gambino with a penknife if he's pissed off, All right. Here we go. This, I believe, is from the UK. Hello, sir. I love your show. Keep it up. A quick question. The Godfather of Harlem portrays Frank Costello as a mediator between the 5 families. However, at this point, I thought after the botched attempt on his life carried out by Vinny the Chin Gigante, he quietly went into the background and retired. I appreciate your show. It's a work I appreciate the show, The Godfather of Harlem, but I know it's a wonder of fiction. I just wondered if there's any truth to that. Love from the UK. True, Costello was a mediator in every sense of the word. He was really the mob's tactile governor, and what I mean is he helped everybody sort of keep focus on business, and he was the mob's answer to politicians. Costello's real skill was smoothing over and greasing politicians. Without him, they couldn't control unions. Without him, they couldn't control the local politics. If you needed a governor to turn the other way, when you installed joker poker machines in a bar, Costello was the guy that you went and saw. You needed local cops, you needed state investigators to sort of move everything along, and Costello was the guy. Costello was a very dangerous killer in his youth. He was a member of Murder, Inc., but once he becomes sort of boss, he relied more on being even-keeled and sort of a peacemaker more than anything. After Gigante does try to shoot and whack him, Costello saw the writing on the wall and retired, but he never, ever forgot what Genovese did to him, how Genovese ordered the hit, and he ends up getting even with Genovese, along with Carlo Gambino and Lucky Luciano, somewhere down the line, which we're going to talk about today in the Havana Conference. But yes, that part is accurate, but everything else that I've heard and seen with that show, The Godfather Harlem, is fucking nonsense. Fucking nonsense. All right, let's see what we got here. If Nino Gaggi was not facing trial while being behind... if Nino Gaggi wasn't facing a trial while being behind bars and was out on the street, do you think John Gotti would have attempted the hit on Costello since Castellano and Nino Gaggi were friends and so close? I don't know how close Nino and Paul Castellano were. They had a lot of problems towards the end of both of their lives. Well, not towards Nino's, because he obviously would live and Castellano will get clipped. Castellano blamed Gaggi for Roy DeMeo and for the Westies and for the fucking the DeMeo crew and the bodies and the car chop shop and the Kuwait stuff. It's all encompassing, right? So I think at the end of the day, I think Gotti would have done anything at that point because he felt like he was backed in a corner. Neil was dying. He knew he couldn't do anything. He was afraid Castellano was going to kill him and his whole crew. He didn't have a choice, so he thought. Now, had he have waited, Castellano would have gone to prison the rest of his fucking life to begin with, but I think Gotti realized that unless they took him out, there was no way he could become boss. And I don't think necessarily that Gotti feared Nino Gaggi whatsoever. However, had Roy DeMeo been alive and not been killed, I think it might have been a different situation. And I'm not saying that Gotti was afraid of DeMeo, but I think if DeMeo and the crew had still been intact, I think that Gotti might have hesitated a little bit because I don't know if Roy DeMeo, because he was loyal to Paul Castellano, would have gone along with that. Like I said, I don't have a crystal ball on these things, but I think given the archetype of who Roy DeMeo was, I don't know if John Gotti would have tried that shit with DeMeo still on the streets. But like I said, I don't know. He might have done it anyway. All right, referencing the book Havana Nocturne. By the way, that is a great book. If you have not had a chance to read about the Havana Conference, Havana, everything Meyer Lansky and the mob in Cuba, go out and buy Havana Nocturne by T.J. English. He's one of my favorite authors as far as the mob genre goes. You can't beat that book. I had 3 copies. I lost every single one of them. I need a new one. It's a fantastic book. It's one of those books you can read, you put down for a year, you go back and you find more. So if you have not gotten that book, go out and get it. Once again, it's Havana Nocturne by T.J. English. All right. Referencing the book Havana Nocturne, do you think that the mob had the mob not been kicked out of Havana, Cuba, would Santos Trafficante have gone after Meyer Lansky, as the book portrays him to be sort of jealous of Lansky? Do you think that Anastasia, if he wasn't killed, would have gone after Lansky too, as he felt he was getting robbed from the money that was being made out there? Look, this is something I think about a lot of the time. I think some people seem to think that Meyer Lansky ran the Italian Mafia. He didn't. While he was of Jewish background and while he was a very powerful guy, he never ran the mob. He didn't run the mob when Luciano was arrested or imprisoned. That fell under Costello and sort of the commission. and I think that that's a huge misconception. Now, Anastasia, on the other hand, wanted more money and kept griping and complaining about it, which is one of the reasons why they whacked him, amongst others, which we've talked about before on the show. If you want to know more about how that all went down, you can go on YouTube, type in Mob Talk Radio, Albert Anastasia, and the whole entire show talks about what happened. But Lansky definitely, I think, in so many ways, robbed the mob. Listen, guys kick up but so much, and I think he definitely kept a lot of money to himself. But because Lansky was making so much money for the mob, I think a lot of people just kind of turned their head and didn't say a whole lot, because at the end of the day, he was a huge moneymaker for them. But believe me, if anybody really seriously thought that Meyer Lansky was robbing them hardcore, they would have killed him. They wouldn't have hesitated. And don't forget, Lansky made a lot of people multimillionaires. And he took it in the ass financially when Batista was ousted by that jerk-off beard-faced Castro, and they lost everything. But I don't think Trafficante would have killed Lansky over it. Anastasia probably would have, hands down, had he lived. I think he might have tried it. But even if, Anastasia wasn't killed, I'm not sure. We can play the different odds here. And I think a lot of people could have blamed Lansky for everything that happened in Cuba, and they didn't. And I think that speaks volumes as to the respect that Meyer Lansky did carry. And it's worth noting. I mean, not for nothing. Allegedly, Lansky lost $500 million when Cuba shut down. And there was a bigger issue to them losing Cuba other than just the fucking Hotel Nacional and the gambling. Cuba was a mecca for drug distribution. When they lost Cuba, it wasn't just gambling they lost. They lost a hub for drug trafficking, which would create huge problems for the mob. But we're going to get into that today, too. All right, I know this won't be popular, but how familiar are you with San Francisco and San Jose? I am going to be doing a show on the California Mafia, so stay tuned on that. All right, in the John Wick movies, it's implied that there is a commission-like structure with all of major organized crime families around the world, be it Italian, Russian, Irish, cartels, and etc. What do you think the likelihood of that would be? Look, that's exactly how they operate. There's always a hierarchy. There's always a structure. Sometimes the structure is a little different, as we're going to find out here in this Q&A, because I did get a question about Andromeda and their structure. But look, there's definitely a pecking order in all of organized crime, with very, very few exceptions. If you look at the Albanians, for example, they're one of the only groups that are just not organized at all, and they resemble more of a splinter cell or a small clan from Italy than they do, say, an organized structure. That's one of the Albanians' biggest problems, is they're not organized. If they were organized, it might be a little different of a story, but all organizations have a structure, from MS-13 to the Medellin cartel to whatever group. There's always a structure to it. All right. All right, does a captain and a crew of a family preside over just shoulders, or is it structured like a family within a family? For instance, would the captain have a consigliere and a lieutenant, etc.? Look, some families operate in different kind of ways, but the majority operate, just as you would suspect. There's a boss, an underboss, a consigliere, a capo, soldiers, soldato, whatever you want to call them, associates, and a capo. Look, a capo is respected throughout the organization, just not only just his crew. A captain from one crew still carries that respect to another crew. Granted, there are some captains that don't like each other. There are some crews that don't like certain captains, but at the end of the day, a captain is to be respected, and that's how it sort of has to work. And like we saw Sonny Red and Sonny Black, and what happened with the Bonanos, you have crews that don't like each other, captains that don't like each other, they vie for power, they backbite, they're subversive, but ultimately, at the end of the day, that's how it sort of works, unless there's something going on that I'm not aware of. All right. Hey, Jeff, quick question. Was Jerry Vale, the Italian singer, connected to the mob? He was, but only in regards to his career. Like Sinatra, well, Sinatra's a little different, and we're going to talk a little bit about him today, but not a whole lot. But Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Al Martino, they all had connections to the mob. In fact, Sinatra got his career thanks to the mob, because it was Skinny D'Amato, who owned the 500 Club in Atlantic City, who was able to get Sinatra in clubs when nobody knew who he fucking was. They realized he was a good singer, and that really launched his career. same time, when Sinatra couldn't get out of the Tommy Dorsey contract, he goes to the Fischetti brothers, who stick a barrel of a gun in Dorsey's mouth and say, look, either you're going to let Sinatra out of his contract or we're going to fucking kill you. So Jerry Vale, yes, had a lot of mob contacts, but it just is in the context of he worked clubs that gangsters owned. He was at the Copacabana, which mobsters owned and mobsters hung out at. So these guys all knew sort of each other, but that's where it sort of stops. It's not like Jerry Vale was a fucking hitman. Could you imagine him singing Adi La and then pulling out a gun and whacking half the fucking crowd? Come on. He was just a singer who rubbed elbows with a lot of different people. All right. If you had to pick one of these four gangsters to be stuck in a broken elevator with for 12 hours, who would you choose? Tommy Agro, Anthony Mira. Oh, my God. Tommy Karate or Gaspipe Castle. But you putting me with three of the biggest fucking nut jobs that ever fucking work in a mob. Are you crazy? All three of those guys chopped up fucking bodies. I mean, I don't know what the odds of... Do you imagine farting in an elevator with fucking Tommy Agro, Anthony Mira, and Gaspipe Casso standing next to you? They'd stick an elevator button up your fucking ass. They're all lunatics. The way I kind of see is Tommy Agro would probably end up shitting himself and try to kill me in 3 seconds for blaming me for the elevator not working. Anthony Mira would probably not be able to be being confined in a fucking elevator and probably choke me to death. Gaspipe might get a little stir crazy, and if he didn't kill me, he'd likely do it as soon as the doors opened, as if he didn't hesitate to kill anybody. Tommy Patera would probably talk to me about karate, Bruce Lee, and the simple things of life like dismemberment and stabbing. So I guess if I'm stuck, I got to go with Tommy Patera. All right, I have a question. Okay, I gotta skip that one. That's a little too sensitive for some of these shows. As you could tell, I don't write these down and make notes. I just throw them out and I just kind of read off of them. But sometimes there's questions that I'm too close to the subject and I can't really get into it. All right, what is your opinion on the Gene Barello interview on YouTube? If you've watched it, I watched 3 seconds of it. Okay. I did watch the Gene Barello interview, and I watched it for about 3 minutes and turned it off. It's another informant spilling nonsense. I don't have time for it. You can go watch it for yourself and sort of make your own revelation about that. But I have really not a lot of interest in stuff like that, to be honest with you. I think the only stuff that I really did watch was the Sammy Gravano one. Just because I was interested and intrigued in the history of it. But, you get so far into the Sammy Gravano ones and the lies start, and it's just kind of like, what do you do? It's like rubbing shit on your own face and wondering why you smell. It just, shit sticks to the wall. All right, I've never been to Rouse's Sparks Steakhouse. Do they exploit the fact that they were once hangouts for the mafia? For a lack of a better term. Umberto's is closed. WFAN in New York used to have an overnight host who did live commercials for Umberto's Clam House. Joe and Mary's is gone. So the question is, do or did these restaurants exploit the fact that top mafia members frequented these restaurants? No, I don't think that they really exploited it. I think that was probably something that was notoriety. And I think, did that bring people in? Sure, absolutely. So I don't think that they sought after sort of getting attention for it. I think it just sort of had its own natural effect. I mean, people that I know that go to Sparks don't go, hey, we ate where Castellano got whacked. They don't say that to me. Umberto's is still there. I know people that do go there for that reason. I know it's a lot of tourists that go to these trappings. I see photos online all the time. People taking pictures of themselves outside Sparks laying down on their back, which always kind of makes me laugh a little bit because people are fucking nuts or lunatics. But I don't think they exploited it. But did it help them? I can't say that it didn't. But I don't think they sought after it. I mean, if you owned a restaurant, would you want to say, okay, by the way, when you come in, I know you're waiting in line to get a fucking table. You'll have a table in 25 minutes. But if you've got nothing going on, go look at the pavement where Castellano's brains were splattered all over the fucking place. I don't think they're doing that. Not at all. Or stuff like that. All right. Most powerful mob boss in New York from each decade. 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Man, I think in the 50s, obviously, you're going to have a real sort of tie Carlo Gambino and Russell Bufalino, but I'm going to be fair and say in the 50s, Carlo Gambino, in the 60s, Russell Bufalino, in the 70s, Carlo Gambino, in the 80s, Vinny Gigante, and the 90s, Vinny Gigante, the 2000s, I got to go with Barney Bolomo, but that's just me. I was going to say Frank Cali, but if you really knew, Frank Cali was not, he was a front boss for somebody else, but from what I understand, Barney Bolomo carries some fucking weight, my friends. All right. If you had to be a mafia guy, which mobster reminds you most of yourself? I'm not a gangster. I'm not a gangster. It's not it, even though people want to try to say crazy shit. But just to humor myself, I'm a little bit Vinny Gigante and Nicky Scarfo rolled into one. Just depends on what day. I'm a little Nicky Scarfo when people piss me off. I'm not gonna stab anybody in a diner with a fucking butter knife, and I'm sure as fuck not gonna launch a fucking horse off a cliff. I'm sorry. Listen. I'm not into animals getting abused. I'm not into fucking animals getting tortured. But it's just the idea of Nicky Scarfo on a fucking horse. The horse kicks him off. Scarfo gets up and has the horse whacked because he thinks the horse did it intentionally. And he had the fucker pushed off a cliff using a bulldozer. Oh, God. I have a friend named Andrew, and I don't know if he's going to listen to the show. Him and I get a big kick out of Nicky Scarfo all the time. We always have this running joke with each other that we're going to get a cardboard cutout of Nicky Scarfo. We're going to poke out the eyes and put in like red lights, and we're going to hide it in Philly and Eddie's closet so that when he opens it, all he sees is a cutout of Nicky Scarfo with his eyes glowing. Oh my God. So I'm sorry for the animal lovers out there. Listen, I'm definitely I'm definitely not one for any animal getting hurt or any fucking kind of level. But something about Nicky Scarfo going fucking nuts, screaming, "Kill the fucking horse! Kill the fucking horse!" It just kind of drives me crazy. And anything that I think you could do to Philly and Eddie to jostle him and make him take that fucking atrocious Frank Vincent fucking wig off his head. Oh my God. I don't know what's more fucking delusional. You could put Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson had an interview with Ed Bradley where Ed Bradley says to him, Michael, you've been accused of fucking molesting kids over here. Don't you think that it would probably be prudent at this point that you stop sleeping in bed with kids? No. It's the same fucking line of questioning that Philly and Eddie got, and he just has this blank, dumb fucking look on his face where he has, no idea where the fuck he is, doesn't see anything wrong with what he did, and he's wearing a raccoon on his fucking head. Oh, geez. See, this is the things that keep me up late at night. You people listen to my show and you say, this guy's fucking nuts. You should hear the shit that I say to myself half the time. I mean, Christ, I'm laughing about an animal getting thrown off a fucking cliff by a fucking bulldozer. We also used to joke, me and my friend Andrew used to joke that we were going to make a ventriloquist dummy to look like Nicky Scarfo and find Philly and Eddie at some cafe and just sit there and move his mouth. Hey, Phil, how are you doing? Anyway, that's just goes to show you that the mental difficulties that I have are pretty insane. All right. Is the Marcello family still active in New Orleans, or is it an open city? They're still active, probably more so than people know. They're definitely open a hell of a lot more than they used to be, say, back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. They're still there, but they don't have the power that they once were. All right. Where is Pat Musitano? Do you think he's even still in Canada? Maybe Western New York? No, he's still in Canada. I don't want to say how I know that, but as far as from what I have been told by somebody, he's just laying low. I mean, after somebody tries to kill you, what do you expect to do? He didn't leave Canada. He's still there. But I am going to say this for the record. The longer that he goes unseen by his people, the more and more gossip begins. Once the gossip begins, then it becomes, he's a rat, and you know where that kind of is going to lead. Pat Musitano is not a rat by any stretch of the imagination. I can't think for 1 second he would ever be like that. But when you start to be unseen, even though you're protecting yourself, it creates a lot of problems. All right. Your opinion of Paul Castellano Jr. What about him? Do I think he followed his father's footsteps into organized crime? Nah. He owns a construction company. He owns part of the beef company that his father owned. He's not in the life whatsoever. He did have some criminal stuff a couple of years ago, but no, he's not involved. He just keeps a low profile and does his own thing. There were rumors of mob kickbacks and stuff like that, but I don't buy any of it. The guy's a good kid. He's not a kid, really, but he's a good guy, and no, he's absolutely not involved in that life. Absolutely fucking not. Okay, is the Trafficante crime family still active or defunct? They are still active. They're like with anybody else, they're just not what they once were. And when I say that, what I mean to that is put Santos Trafficante out there and then take like an associate and compare them. You can't. Also, Trafficante's power came at a time when politics was Cuba, the Kennedys. So you can't really compare what is going on today with, say, what happened yesteryear, so to speak. And I think it's a fair statement. Trafficante Sr. and then Trafficante Jr. were very tough men, very smart men, very wealthy men, very conniving men. And they're both legends, okay? But you can't exactly take Vinny Lascalzo and compare him to Vincent Trafficante, Santos Trafficante, Vincent. Vinny, everything's getting jumbled here. But no, you cannot compare Vinny Lascalzo to Santos Trafficante whatsoever, but they're still there. They just aren't what they were. It's Florida's still an open territory for the most part, if you like New Jersey in a sense. Lascalzo's the tough guy. He's a leader, but at the same time, he doesn't have the kind of juice that the Trafficantes had, and that's just the truth. All right, John Bon Jovi claims that he's related to Frank Sinatra. I've always suspected that John Bon Jovi's father was connected. Is that true? No, and no. John Bon Jovi is not related to Frank Sinatra. In fact, that's been wildly reported inaccurately for a long time. Actually, believe it or not, just like within the last couple of weeks, Bon Jovi was talking about how he loved Sinatra as a singer and he wanted to write ballads that could be compared to Sinatra, and he always wished that he could have met him, but no, there was no relation there. He was just simply a fan and not a relative, and Bon Jovi's father was not a connected guy whatsoever. All right. Is it possible the mob is still holding the funds for the casinos in Las Vegas these days? Well, I don't suspect. Okay. I don't think. All right. So when the big corporations came into Las Vegas, the mob was effectively neutered. They weren't getting the kind of skim that they wanted, but that doesn't mean they weren't getting kickbacks, because a lot of these guys still secretly controlled portions of the casino, right? So I don't suspect that ultimately the mob is still holding funds from Vegas, but it wouldn't surprise me that in a lot of these big corporations are small fronts for mob crime families. It wouldn't shock me. I don't have proof of that, obviously, and I don't think that you can totally take the mob out of Vegas either, because even though that people claim the mob is no longer in Vegas, think about it. You have casinos. There's casinos, there's money, and the minute that you can borrow on credit from a Vegas casino, that's what ends the mob in Vegas, or ends the mob bookmaking in a lot of different ways. But as long as they're able to loan out money on credit, they're always going to be there. All right, this is a question I got, and I'm not knocking the person that asked me this question. I'm really not. I'm just a little, I'll be honest with you, fucked up about the question. Is the mob involved in child pornography? I don't know, and I fucking hope not. Listen, mob guys will make money any way that they possibly fucking can. But I'm going to tell you something that I hope is universally true. And when I say I hope, I mean there's always going to be some fucking jerk off, some fucking scumbag, some dirtbag, some fucking pigeon, some crumb, to use my Philadelphia lingo, that is going to do shit like that, right? Do I know of any mobster was involved in child porn? No. Were they involved in gay porn and porn in general? Sure, absolutely. How the fuck you think Deep Throat got made? Sonny Francis. Hello. But child pornography? No, I don't think so. Listen, there's a lot of things. You got to understand, first of all, Italian culture. Sure, there's one scumbag out of a million that might do something like that. But Italian culture, there's a couple things you don't do. You don't curse at a woman. You don't put your hands on a woman. You don't touch a fucking kid. You do any of those things, that's it. That's it. That still stands today. I'm telling you. All right, how active was Peter Gotti in the life? John Sr.'s son, Peter, not his brother. Never. Peter Gotti is a good guy. He's a nice guy. He's not involved in the life whatsoever. He works his ass off. Not involved in any illegal shit whatsoever. I know the feds have always tried to say otherwise, but I can honestly tell you that Peter is not involved in anything like that whatsoever. And I don't really know Peter. I've met him a couple of times, I'll be honest with you. Never had a conversation with the guy more than, a minute or two, but nah. He carries himself a different way. Guys in that life carried themselves a certain way, a certain style. Peter's like the kid you went to elementary school with, that farts out loud. I'm not saying he did that, but he's like one of those guys. He's not a criminal. He's not involved in that life. He's not even near that life. I think that one thing, and I'm not speaking for him because I don't know him, but I can tell you that I think when your father goes to prison, your brother goes to prison, or your fucking uncles go to prison, your son goes to prison, I think when you see that, it sort of has a negative effect of this is what will happen to you if you choose to do these fucking things. And I think that that's what he saw. Like I said, I don't want to speak for the guy. I don't even really know him. But I think that the reality is absolutely not. All right. Why didn't Tommy Gambino become boss after Carlo Gambino died, being Carlo's son? Look, Tommy was on record. He said it before to the press, is that he only got involved in the mafia because of his father. He felt like he had to join the family business. He felt like he was beholden, like he didn't have a choice. And he always lamented and had regret, saying, I wish I could have done what I wanted to do with my life, but I had no choice but to do this. Listen, he wasn't cut from the same cloth as his father. He wasn't his father. Tommy's a soft guy. And when I say that, I mean soft-spoken, mild-mannered, a nurturer. He's not a psychopath and a fucking killer, and I think that's a lot of it. I just think that Carlo A. didn't want that for his son, and I think Tommy didn't want it for himself. He's different. That's really all I can say about that. All right, why was Russell Buffalino in charge of the Genovese crime family? He was, yes, and it was short-lived. There was an internal beef in the 1970s over leadership, and while the commission was sort of working out what they were going to do, Russell Buffalino did step in and sort of oversee what was going on. And it was pretty much after Tommy Eboli gets whacked for not paying back Carlo Gambino the loan that he acquired from Gambino, which was for $4 million. Prior to that, Genovese had gone to prison, and a ruling panel was installed, and it would be between Jerry Catena, Eboli, and Benny Squint Lombardo. In 1969, Genovese actually dies in prison, and Lombardo sort of becomes the official boss, but then there were some arguments really internally over who was actually the boss, and that would create problems. And like I said, Eboli borrows money from Gambino, refuses to pay him back, and they kill him for it, and that's pretty much around the time, and I cannot be specific with you, like on August 4th of 1974, Buffalino took over, but that's pretty much why he stepped in, and he only stepped in until they could rectify the situation. Are you ever going to do a show on Paul Vario? Yes, absolutely. All right. What do the unions or union heads get out of the mafia? What do they get out of the deal to keep changing it? But okay, this is really phrased in a weird kind of way, but basically the gist of the question is that what do the union heads get out of dealing with the mafia, especially when you see boss after boss after boss? Look, they get jobs, they get better wages, they guaranteed work, and that's the trade-off. They don't get laid off. Projects get done. One project opens to another. It's inspections clear that might not clear, and that's really the reason why the union would even go along with it. That and they don't want to get killed. I'll be honest with you. All right. Is there a contract on Michael Francese's head? No, not to my knowledge. Absolutely not. How did Sonny Red and Sonny Black come to be heated rivals? Money and ego. That's the short version of it. I do have a show coming out specifically about Sonny Black and Sonny Red and the Bonanos and what happened with that. That would ultimately lead to the Rizzutos having enough of the Bonanno crime family. It would lead to Vito Rizzuto ending up in prison. But we have a whole entire show based on that. All right, another Nicky Scarfo question. Did Nicky Scarfo actually want to whack Gotti for Sammy? Look, I don't think so. I think it's nonsense. I don't think I buy the story that Sammy told for multiple reasons. Okay, for starters, I don't think Nicky was stupid enough to offer sort of his plan of, hey, Sammy, if you want, I'll kill Gotti for you. I don't think a boss is going to talk to an underboss of another crime family like that. I certainly don't think Nicky was stupid enough to do it, don't get me wrong, but I don't think he was stupid enough to verbally put himself in that position, because if push came to shove, boy, wouldn't that have been a fucking interesting fight between Gotti and fucking Scarfo. How did he know Sammy, and also how did Nicky know that Sammy wasn't going to placate him and go back to Gotti and tell him, which Sammy probably likely would have done. If I was going to believe any of that nonsense that he said, it would probably be that Nicky, if he said something, if anything, it had more to do with money, because he saw the money that Gravano was making, and he wanted a cut of it. He wanted more money to come into himself. He was a greedy fucking prick, and that's the reality of it. Why else would he fucking kill a Riccobene faction? And you can look that up for yourself. But I don't think that meeting ever happened, and let me tell you why. Not once did Sammy bring up that meeting in his testimony. So you mean to tell me Gravano's going to spill the dice on everybody, but not bother to mention that to the FBI? I find it hard to believe. So what? He had special feelings for Nicky Scarfo? Would they hold hands and dance at fucking Memories in the middle of the fucking night or something to fucking Blue Moon or whatever the fuck? Or what's that other song? The fucking King of the Jungle song. In the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. Maybe they held hands and swayed to that shit. But no, he didn't say nothing to the FBI. So I bring it up now. It's just filler. It's filler and it's gossip. And I would also venture a guess as well that if Sammy truly wanted John Gotti dead, he would have killed him himself. Look, rat or no rat, the one thing that Sammy was prolific at was killing people, right? So if he wanted Gotti dead, he would have done it. And I don't think he would have needed Nicky Scarfo to fucking back him. Not for a fucking minute. Not for a fucking minute. All right, what's the significance of the pinky ring? Does the new generation of mobsters still wear it? Look, I wear one, but I've done that since I was 13 years old. That's nothing new. You can look at photos from me as a kid. I've always had them. That's just the way I always am. A lot of people in my family did, so I think it's just one of them things that, you see grandpa doing this or your uncle doing it, you want to emulate him. But also I think back in the day, it was sort of a sign of upper class. It was a sign of being sort of I don't know the right word for it. Well-to-do. It was something that a lot of high socialite people did. And I think the mob really began wearing them for the same reason. I don't think it was this is my, mafia ring. I wear this. Everybody knows I'm in the mob. I don't think that's the way it started. I just think that a couple of people did it, and then everybody else started doing it, and it sort of became synonymous with the mob. One thing I can tell you, though, pinky rings pretty much are done at this point. I wear one. I know a couple of guys that are active that do wear them, but it's become sort of a feature that goes with wearing a suit. Like if you're going out to a club, you wear a suit. You're going out to a nice expensive dinner, you wear a suit. You got the pinky ring. But normal streetwear, normal street attire, they don't. But I'm going to tell you one crime family that doesn't. Philadelphia. They don't wear the gaudy jewelry. They don't wear the silk suits and look all retarded. That is very much a New York thing. Even the tracksuit thing is sort of going out. Even the velour, it's all going out. That's like circa 1980. And that's the difference between New York and, say, Philadelphia in many ways. Is New York is flash and pop. Philly is low-key and quiet. That's the way it should be. So Philadelphia's ahead on the curve and doing what they're supposed to do that way. All right. Let's see what we got over here. Why is Canada the new New York? I don't think it's really the new New York. I mean, it only is in terms of organized crime, in terms of murders. You go back to the 1980s, there's a lot of murders in New York City going back and forth. You got Cassos, Mickey Spillane back in the day, Gotti, you got the Colombo War and all of that. That's the only reason why Canada sort of looks like the new New York. It's just because of the murders. And like I said, the comparison is because it's wild and crazy over there in Canada right now. And that'll eventually subside, even though there was another hit just recently. That's where the comparison sort of begins and ends. All right. How deeply involved was Governor Ed Randall in Pennsylvania to the mob? More than a lot. than probably people are aware of. Russell Bufalino pretty much had Ed Rendell right in his fucking front pocket. Through Rendell, Bufalino got Louis de Naples a casino license, even with knowing ties of felonies and criminality and the organized crime to his background. De Naples would actually use that to open up slots in the Poconos, and in turn, the mob took a $600 kickback and donated it to Rendell's campaign. So obviously he was mobbed up, but while Rendell was not a part of the gaming control board when all that happened, and he's denied those allegations, it's pretty well known that he pushed the button to get it greenlit. If you're willing to push the button to get it greenlit, then you're obviously, the mob has you right in the front of their pockets, which is exactly what it was. But those are really the only things that have come to the forefront in the last year or two, or couple of years, all that being said. All right, if you were doing hard time and you had your choice, and you had a choice of being cellmates with one of these rats for 2 years to go to solitary confinement 2 years straight with no water, who would you choose? Michael Francis, J.R. Rubio, Phil Iannetti, or Ralph Natale? I would kill myself before I ever fucking sat an inch near either one of those fucking fucks. Look, Francis, he's probably the lesser of the rats, but I would have to listen to Jesus all fucking day long, and I can't really do that. Look, I'm Roman Catholic. I don't think I hide that. I've never been quiet about that. But he's a Bible-thumping Baptist fucking weirdo, and not that there's anything wrong with being Baptist. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, I don't want to be thumped with the Bible every 3 seconds. I just masturbated in my tear thinking of the guard, the hack. I must forgive myself. Jesus, I must repent. I don't want to hear that shit. J.R. Rubio would just talk to himself absolutely nonstop about Joey Merlino. Him, Rubio and fucking Dave Schratweiser ought to get married. Then they could talk about Joey Merlino all fucking night. Phil Iannetti would never take off the fucking wig off his head, and that would drive me fucking crazy. It would be like a rabid animal I'd want to kill. Ralph Natale I couldn't deal with because he has no teeth, and he'd be sucking the pudding out of the fucking tray, and he's fucking delusional too. I would rather just kill myself. I'll be honest with you. I would fucking rather somebody hack me to death or throw piss in a hack's face so they beat me to death before I ever fucking ended up in a 6x8 or a 6x9 with those fucking jerk-offs. No fucking way. Send me to the fucking electric chair. I'd drink my own piss before I went near those guys. All right, who's more corrupt, the FBI, CIA, or DEA? Probably the CIA, and I say that because of some of the things that they've been involved with over the years, like presidential assassinations in general, cover-ups and more, and I think that the CIA is more powerful than the president, and, without going into each one, I think the FBI is just a bunch of lying fucks. They have been for a long time. They're finally getting caught for it. The American jury system is finally starting to see them for what they are. The DEA sells drugs to people, helps move drugs. CIA is a little bit different. They get away with straight-up fucking murder of fucking presidential people and presidents of other countries. All right, can women get into the mob or just the men, and why not? Women, for the most part, are not allowed to join the mafia. It's sort of a men's club. However, in Italy, there have been both female hitmen and female bosses. Look up Christina Pinto. She was a hit woman for the Camorra. Also, check out Giuseppe Vitale, who was the actual boss of a Sicilian crime family. She'd eventually become what we call a pentita, which is a rat. But she didn't hesitate to order dozens of deaths. So look up Christina Pinto and Giuseppe Vitale, Vitale, and Christina Pinto, Pinto. There you go. All right. Did you ever hear of my uncle Rudolph Sciarra? Yes, I have heard of him. And to the person who asked me this question, you should message me. I got some stories because I met him back in the 80s. You should message me. I probably have stories you might not have heard before. All right. This comes from my friend in Pennsylvania. Sports betting is now legal in Pennsylvania. Will this affect the mob brackets? It won't, and here's why. I sort of alluded to this a little bit earlier when I was talking about Las Vegas, but as long as people could still bet on credit, there's always going to be bookies and bookmakers. For some, betting is one thing, but people want to bet on credit, and then they want to lay off the winnings onto another bet. So as long as the mob is still offering them credit, you're never going to get rid of that. You're never, even legitimizing or legalizing gambling isn't going to stop that. The minute that you can no longer bet on credit, that's when the change comes. But as long as they're doing credit, forget about it. Forget about it. Besides, what the fuck is illegal about betting anyway? It's illegal because you don't pay the fucking taxes. So, I wouldn't pay fucking taxes on winning. Fuck them. All right, this is going to be a long-winded answer to this question, but it's one that I didn't get before, so hold tight. All right, how are the Camorra, the SCU, and Ndrangheta structured? I am mainly going to ask this about Ndrangheta, but just hold tight, and I'll try to be as clear as I can. Look, they're all similar to Cosa Nostra in structure. They're structured a lot like traditional Cosa Nostra, as we've all become familiar with, but there's some differences, and mainly it's the names and the way that they function. And Ndrangheta, a capo, in terms of what we know, is actually the official boss. The street boss or the underboss is called a Mastro di Giornata. Okay, underneath them are the colonels, followed by the contabile, which is what is considered an accountant, but it really closer resembles a consigliere. In Ndrangheta, the contabile is less important because less important than they are in the United States. The emphasis on a consigliere in Italy, the focus and power isn't like it is here. Here you've got the boss and the consigliere is right next to him, advising him, etc. In Italy, it's a little bit different. They're a little bit lower down on the totem pole. Some of the other differences in Ndrangheta is that marriages there are arranged, and by those marriages there are blood ties, and that's how they divvy up certain territory. Each local mob has the minimum of 50 members, and they answer to the capo locale, who's the head of that local territory, or capo bastone. In Ndrangheta, these captains give orders, they induct members, and that's a difference between Ndrangheta and Cosa Nostra. Captains cannot induct members. Captains can demote and promote, but usually that has to be in accordance with what the boss says. That's not how it works with Ndrangheta. Here in the States, like I said, a capo does not have the ability to induct members into the mob. Now, there's also what's called Societa Minori, and that is what the lower ranks of Ndrangheta is. And if you want to really be clear about it, it's really sort of like a minor league farm team for Ndrangheta. Those who are considered excelled mobsters head to Maggiore Societa, which is called also Societa Santa, which is composed basically of the leaders and the bosses. So you go from the minor leagues, and if you get a little better, you go to Maggiore Societa, then you go to Societa Santa, and you just keep working your way up. It's like a bunch of different minor leagues and systems, okay? And Societa Minori, the lowest rank is Giovanni di Onore, which is usually designed only for descendants of the boss by blood, meaning that they're a member by birthright. And they simply just continue to work their way up the Ndrangheta ladder. Eventually they would graduate to a camarista, which actually, when you translate, means one who collects extortion money. The top level of the group is sagarista, which is Sicilian for soldier. You can also call it soldato, soldati. And so Ndrangheta has a different system for how they do everything. When it comes to made guys or somebody that's involved, you're often called two different things in Ndrangheta. If you're involved but not made, you're a sanista. A sanista, which means you're basically a friend of mine. If you're a friend of ours, you're called Vangelo. When you become a Vangelo, you have to swear an oath on a Bible to join, and you must get a tattoo of a cross on your left shoulder. After that, you become this is a fucked up word, Trequartino, which means, translates to three quarters, or 3/4, which enables you to get access to 3/4 of the organization. You have to have a cross tattoo on your right shoulder. And then you have to have an emerald rose tattoo underneath your foot. So I think nobody's ever really heard this before, but from people that I know that live over there have told me that the reality is that they have, and I don't know if it's always been this way, that this is only in the last 30 years that they're doing this, but that's how they're being identified. Now, if you wanted to make sort of a correlation to that, the Yakuza. The ranks continue upward from Cortino to Padrino to Crociata to Stella Bartolo to Infinito, and it just goes all the way. Each rank of Andrangheta has a religious structure or a name that coincides with their position, and all are identified by the name of a saint, which shows the religious side of things. As far as the initiation ritual, they call it a baptism, and they don't prick the finger. They don't do the gun shit like they do here in the United States. But according to what I know, they basically form a horseshoe around the proposed candidate, and someone in the group has to fucking vouch for you. Captain would oversee the initiation and basically says, you want to join us, but you got to understand your fucking obligations. But there's no blood oath like there is in Cosa Nostra. That is the big major differences. And it seems like Andrangheta has really, there's a huge web of tentacles that sort of comes with Andrangheta. But that's pretty much how it goes. Okay, so we've got one last question, and this one is a fucking doozy. If a movie was made about Tommy Karate Patera, how do you feel about Joaquin Phoenix? It's rumored he's aware of the story. I think he'd be a great choice. I think he's a good actor. He looks kind of weirdly, oddly like him, too, in a creepy kind of staring your window in the middle of the night kind of guy. All right, all that being said, those are all the questions we're going to get to today. When we come back, we are going to talk about the Havana Conference. Stay tuned to Mob Talk Radio. On a given week, I'm out of town a lot. Whether it's Philadelphia, it's New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, wherever the case may be, I'm always looking for a place where I can sit down and have a great dinner. Ambiance is key, price is obviously key, but the most important thing is the food good? And there's a place I want to tell you about today. It's called Saltwater at Margate. If you are going down to the shore, because I know a lot of people in Philadelphia go to the shore, especially Margate, you're missing out on a great restaurant if you haven't been there. The name is Saltwater Margate. It's at 9401 Ventnor Avenue, Margate City, New Jersey. The phone number there is 609-289-8078. You can also visit them online at saltwatermargate.com. This place is unbelievable. Not only is the food absolutely superb, the price is great too. They're renowned for their pizza and their gnocchi. They have all kinds of different things from mussels to roast pork and Italian fare. So do yourself a favor, do me a favor, go and visit Saltwater Margate. You will not be disappointed. It is a place that I think at some point, if not already, there's going to be lines out the door and around the block. So if you're down on the shore, stop in, go to Saltwater Margate. At least check them out online at saltwatermargate.com. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We are going to talk about the Havana Conference, and we have talked about this somewhat in depth before, but I've been getting a lot of questions revolving around the Havana Conference. And like I said earlier, you know, if you want to get TJ English's book, Havana Nocturne, that really gets very specific about it. But because I've been getting a lot of questions about the Havana Conference and the historical implications of that, I sort of wanted to take time today to sort of talk about that. And like I said earlier at the top of the show, I know we normally talk about mobsters and we do the biographies of them, but like I said, a lot of questions, so I just kind of wanted to sort of get a little more in depth. And I think, like I said earlier, too, I think one of the perceptions is that once Lucky Luciano gets locked up, that Meyer Lansky took over. And he really didn't. That's a misnomer that I see put in a lot of these mafia fan group pages on Facebook that just don't get it right. Now, while Lansky, like I said also earlier, was honored and respected for his ability to make money, at the end of the day, the mob is not going to allow somebody who had a Jewish background to rub. I said this shit twice. Boy, this coronavirus, apparently it's affecting me now. No, I don't have the coronavirus, but you get what I'm saying. But as powerful as Lansky was, they would never put him in charge of the mob. And that's just... and before anybody tries to say it's an anti-Semitic thing on my behalf, that's not really it. He carried weight. He just wasn't Lucky Luciano at the end of the day. All right. So the Havana Conference would be held at the Hotel Nacional de Cuba, December 26th of 1946. The meeting was arranged by Lucky Luciano on behalf of Meyer Lansky for multiple reasons, and we're going to get into all of them. It was meant to be a meeting between the leaders of American Cosa Nostra and Sicilian Cosa Nostra. And prior to the meeting, Luciano was actually in prison serving a 30 to 50-year sentence for pandering, which was right about the time that World War II was beginning. Joe Lanza, or Joe Sox Lanza, depending on what you know about him, he was a guy at the time who controlled the Fulton Fish Market in Manhattan as well as the docks and the unions, and he was a boss as well, not a boss of the mob, but a boss of a crew. As well, Meyer Lansky, they would be approached by the United States military intelligence. The military pretty much at that point was very, very paranoid about the Nazis. They didn't want the Nazis coming into America and affecting the ports. They didn't want submarines coming into New York ports. They just didn't want Nazi ships coming anywhere near the fucking port of New York, and they needed help. They wanted to make sure that the ports in New York specifically, as well as all the ports throughout the eastern seaboard, were protected. The suggestion that they came up with was how would Lucky Luciano, or would he even help? And what they specifically wanted from him was they wanted him to help with an effort to support the military, and they wanted him to be able to ensure that the ports would be safe from harm. The government, like I said, was especially concerned about shipping ports because they were at the time making ships to send them off to war. They were loading goods. They just didn't want the Nazis fucking with it. That's essentially what it comes down to. And if Luciano could promise that the ports in the eastern seaboard would be safe and protected under his watch, then they pretty much would pardon him for his crimes, but that once that happened and the war was over, he would be deported back to Italy, and he would be considered a free guy, could do what he want. He just couldn't stay in America. Lansky and Lanza take that idea to Lucky Luciano, and without hesitation, Lucky Luciano was like, yeah, whatever you guys want, I'll help. And yes, he wanted to get out of prison. I don't think there's any mistaking that. But at the same time, he did love the United States, and anything that he could help, he would. But don't think for a second that he did it just as a flag-waving American. It had a lot to do with the fact that he wanted to get the fuck out of prison. And so there you go. So he would help them in whatever capacity that or request that the United States military asked of him. So after the war ends, Thomas E. Dewey, who then was the governor of New York, would agree that Luciano should be pardoned, but the only condition that he was going to set forth, and when they approached Luciano originally, they didn't say that him being deported was a must. They just said that might be a part of the deal. But what ends up happening is Dewey basically pardons him from prison, but he tells him, you're never going to step foot in the United States ever again. You're gone. It was sort of a backstabbing move, a little bit, and infuriated Luciano. And it wasn't really the deal that Lucky Luciano was approached with from the beginning. It's not really what he agreed to, but he was getting out of the can and figured somewhere down the line, he'd find a way back into the country, or so he thought at the time. He would be released, and the mob sends him a huge party as a send-off. And in February of 1946, he ends up heading back to Italy, and he settles in Sicily. After a few months, he would then move to Palermo, then to Naples, then to Rome. Once he gets to Rome, the Roman authorities threw him out. They didn't want him there. A lot of pressure was put on the the Italian police in Rome by the Vatican, who did not want Luciano near Vatican City whatsoever, and they used their power to pretty much tell him, get the fuck out of here, you're not welcome here. And basically they looked at him like they say in bars, I don't care where you go, but you can't stay here. And that's what happens to Luciano, and he ends up settling again, this time, once again, back in Naples. So he sort of settles back into life in Naples and sort of begins his plot to return to the United States. In the fall of 1946, Luciano was drinking coffee at a cafe in Naples. An old friend from the United States, who was also a gangster, who had recently been deported from the States, basically walks over, throws an unmarked envelope on the table, and walks away. Luciano opens up the envelope, and in the envelope is a letter with 3 words: December, Hotel Nacional. Luciano, in September of that year, would use his contacts within the Italian consulate and government to attain visas to Mexico, to Cuba, to South America, and Guatemala, and some other places, using his actual name. It meant that he could actually go west, and he could actually get into Cuba without any interference from the authorities whatsoever. Luciano was definitely worried about being spotted. So what he does is he doesn't take a direct route to Cuba. He would actually fly from Italy to Venezuela, then from Venezuela to Mexico City. Then he would land in Havana, Cuba. When Luciano arrives, he's met by Meyer Lansky at the airport. And as the two sat down for dinner, Luciano pretty much looks at Lansky and says, listen, we need to have a meeting with all the bosses, all the organized crime guys immediately. Originally, Lansky wanted him to come down there to talk about investing in the Hotel Nacional for profit. That was the guys why Lansky wanted him there, wanted to see him, but Luciano tells him immediately, we got to set a meeting with everybody across the board. He wanted to meet with all the bosses in December, and they agreed that December 22nd was a good date. Also, while discussing the fact that Luciano wanted to have a meeting with the entire mob, Lansky officially offers Luciano a piece of the Hotel Nacional. Luciano knew that Lansky was a money operator and knew that whatever Lansky was bringing to him would have been a good option. So Lansky says, throw me $150,000 and you can get in. And this is exactly what Luciano does. And it also helped that Lansky's partner in the hotel was President Batista. One of the things Luciano did request from Lansky was to ensure through Batista that all of the logs of anybody coming in through freight liners or by plane, he wanted their names removed from the ledger to ensure that nobody could be traced back to attending the meeting. Lansky told him, not a problem, I'll take care of it. The meeting would take place on, like I said, December 22nd of 1946. Along with the bosses came massive tributes for Luciano, which was pretty much expected. The first night, Luciano planned a quiet dinner with Joe Adonis, Meyer Lansky, and Frank Costello. Costello would present Luciano with $250,000 as a welcome home gift. To further cover the meeting's real cause, however, Luciano had asked Frank Sinatra to come to Cuba along with the Facchetti brothers, so that if anybody started getting wise about why all these guys were meeting, Luciano could lie and say, look, this is a benefit party for charity, etc., etc. And Sinatra did not come empty-handed. Along with Sinatra and the Facchetti brothers, he showed up with $200,000 in cash, which came from the Chicago rackets that were given to Luciano. Sinatra, at various points over his lifetime, did this for the mob multiple times, and the mob used him in that regard because they felt that nobody would ever question why Sinatra had a bunch of fucking money. Turns out the FBI was fucking watching Sinatra. So the meeting would be concerning the following issues and topics: the Bugsy Siegel problem, casinos in Havana, narcotics distribution, and Vito Genovese. In attendance at this meeting were representatives from New Jersey, New York, Chicago, Buffalo, New Orleans, and Florida. Also in attendance was the Jewish conglomerate, as the Jewish mob bosses were allowed to attend. They were allowed to speak openly, but they could not vote on Cosa Nostra rules. They could not vote on Cosa Nostra policies, but they were allowed input, especially when it concerned the Flamingo in Las Vegas. Luciano was also concerned with the issue of boss of bosses. He had long thought that the issue went back to Maranzano and Joe Masseria, who each in their own right attempted to call themselves the boss of bosses, which created war and drama. This is one of the main reasons why Luciano would institute the commission. He wanted a ruling panel. He wanted to be able to settle beefs. He wanted these guys to focus on crime and not leadership, because he felt like as long as they were all focused on crime and everybody had their own territory and there was a way to settle disputes, then they could just keep functioning and keep moving forward. And that was one of the hang-ups that Joe Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano had, is they couldn't get past their egos, which created problems, which is one of the reasons why Luciano had them both fucking killed. After Maranzano and Masseria were killed, Luciano easily could have named himself the boss of boss, but he didn't do it. He just felt that it was simpler just to have a structure and just keep moving with it. The problem was Vito Genovese didn't seem to understand that even if Lucky Luciano wasn't in the streets, he was still to be respected no matter what. And Vito Genovese has some difficulties accepting a lot of things. And one of the things that had happened was that Vito had fled from the United States back to Italy because he was trying to run from murder charges. Eventually, well, let me step back for 1 second. When he leaves, Luciano elevates Costello to effectively the active boss. When Genovese was still there, he was the underboss of the crime family, and this was prior to Luciano getting kicked out of the country. So when Genovese comes back, he totally expects Luciano to make him the boss or to make him the de facto leader, and that's not something that Luciano was willing to do. So what sort of happens is Costello begins to fear that Genovese was going to try to take over by violence, and basically Luciano and Costello sat down and they had long discussions on the issue as to what to do about it. While Luciano had no intention of stepping down whatsoever, he realized that day-to-day operations had to be controlled by somebody who could actually follow his vision, and he needed to have somebody that was actually in the streets, and that was Costello, not Vito Genovese. Luciano realizes that Genovese likely isn't just going to step aside, and something sort of had to be done. Genovese, who was in Cuba, was not invited to this particular part of the meeting. And while Luciano knew that something had to be done, he also wanted to give Genovese sort of the benefit of the doubt, wanted to give him a chance to sort of understand that he was in a no-win situation. So as a backup plan, Luciano suggested that they bring back the boss of bosses title. Luciano felt that this was the only way that he could hang on to whatever power he had left and could sort of contain what he thought Genovese might try to do. An official vote would take place later on down the line, and Albert Anastasia and Costello would fully back Luciano. Anastasia also had a reason to support Luciano besides the fact of just sort of falling in line. Anastasia had a beef with Genovese because Genovese was starting to move into his territory and take over the docks, which did not set well with Anastasia whatsoever. So on the third night of the conference, Lucky Luciano asks Vito Genovese to meet him in an apartment that he had just above where they were meeting. Genovese shows up, the two sit down, and Luciano would begin to explain to him sort of the apples and oranges of everything. He would try to diffuse the issue between the two men, and he would explain that Costello had earned his right to be where he was, that Genovese had basically fled. What was Luciano to do? And Genovese, not to be outheard, looks at Luciano and says he should retire. He tells Luciano that his day was over and that he should let himself run the family. Genovese would further push it by saying that Luciano looked old, he looked tired, and Luciano was not going to tolerate that, and he immediately begins to beat the shit out of Vito Genovese. The beating was so severe that Genovese had to be carried to his room, and he didn't leave for 3 or 4 days until he could physically walk to return back to New York. This would end up sort of sparking a serious issue between Luciano, Genovese, Lansky, and Costello, but we will get to that sort of here down the line, but ultimately it would spell the end of both Luciano and Genovese at the same time. The other topic in the meeting was narcotics. The issue was that many bosses wanted to move into the narcotics trade, and there were those that were opposed, like Costello, who offered differing views. The basic concern with those against it feared that it would bring in law enforcement, too much prison time. But then on the flip side, those that supported it felt like that if they didn't get involved, other criminal small groups that were around would not only when I say outrank them, meaning they would make more money, and by in turn of having that, they would be more powerful in them, and that's not something that they were willing to sort of deal with. Luciano had been in the drug game for years. He knew how the game was played, but there had never really been a national ruling as far as the commission goes on how they wanted to deal with it. And this is why the topic was brought up. Going back to 1910, Luciano had been involved in narcotics trafficking, specifically after Arnold Rothstein got whacked. Both Luciano and Louis Lepke Buchalter had pretty much taken over his drug operation and made it a huge success. And then the mob really gets into drugs in the 20s as a group. In those days, it was mainly cocaine, fucking marijuana, and heroin. And then by the 1930s, the mob had begun trafficking drugs from the East Asia Golden Triangle as well as South America into Cuba and into Florida. Because the relationship of the mob and the Cuban government, specifically Batista, because of him, they were able to use Cuba as a port of transportation of narcotics, sort of a holding area or a way station in between other place. Cuba offered them ports, ships, and buildings under armed guard without a problem. The drugs would be dispersed via Montreal, then Ontario, then in the United States. And what made it work was that the mob was able to control all of those ports. What Luciano suggested was very basic, and this is what it was. He wanted to import heroin into the United States. The route that he wanted to utilize was from Italy to North Africa, then to Cuba, then to the United States, then to Canada. Those are the same routes that a lot of narco traffickers use today. The major difference today is that Afghanistan is one of the bigger hubs or the initial focus point of trafficking today. Luciano, when living in exile in Italy, had become closer to other bosses there who could control their ports in Italy. And so basically Luciano had begun systematically locking down Italy and other ports in Europe while he was stuck there. He also would be able to get into companies who could manufacture heroin in Italy, which was legal at the time. It wasn't illegal to manufacture it. So now he's got the ports, he's got the locations, and now he has companies that will manufacture this shit. So it was a really, really, really thought out, well-designed plan. Luciano would break it down into detailed form for the guys that were in attendance of the meeting. The heroin would arrive in Cuba via North Africa. They would then ship to the United States, specifically any ports controlled by the mob. New York, New Orleans, and Tampa would be the three big hubs in the United States. Shipments landing in New York would be overseen by the Luciano crime family and the Mangano crime family. The New Orleans shipments would be overseen by Carlos Marcello, and in Tampa, the Trafficante crime family would oversee that. There was just too much money to be made, and they ended up voting yes to the drug operations. Luciano then would handle more of the Italian side of things, and he would get all of the local bosses in order over there as well. Luciano then sort of begins to set up factions. The Sicilian side of things, Frank Coppola from the Pardonico clan would cover those operations. The Detroit family, which was also known as the Zarilli crime family, would then step in as well. Their direct job was to ship narcotics from Detroit to New York. Contacts which would have included John Ormento of the Lucchese crime family, Carmine Galante, Natalia Evola from the Bonanno crime family, Frank Lavorsi of the Luciano crime family, Joe Biondo of the Mangano crime family. These were the guys responsible for the East Coast operations. Luciano would then set up contacts all throughout Italy and the contacts in New York as well, including Albert Anastasia, Vito Genovese, Carlo Gambino, Anthony Strollo, Vincent Gigante, and Joe Cargo Velacci, and we know what he ended up being. And his Canadian contacts would be through John Papaglia of the Papaglia crime family, and the Opus, it really became the Opus, what would later become the French Connection, and later would become actually the Pizza Connection. So the same routes are used today that were used then. So the other issue that the mob had to deal with at this meeting was the problem that they had with Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. By the mid-1930s, New York and Chicago pretty much were sent out west to oversee a racing wire service, gambling activities in L.A. and in Nevada, and they wanted to supervise narcotics shipments coming in from Mexico. The go between the Mexican cartels and the American Mafia, believe it or not, was Virginia Hill, who would become Bugsy Siegel's girlfriend. The other issue that the mob has with Benny Siegel is the fact that there's money that goes missing. And I wanted to go back to one thing. The Flamingo Hotel was not Meyer Lansky's idea. A lot of people have always thought that it was Meyer Lansky's idea. They've thought it was Bugsy Siegel's idea, but it wasn't. In fact, it was a hotel and casino which was built by someone who co-owned the Hollywood Reporter named Billy Wilkerson. Wilkerson had attempted to build it, but he had run out of money, so it just sort of fucking sat there in the desert collecting dust. Siegel had known about the hotel, and he ends up going to Lansky and asks him to go to Chicago and New York and ask for money. Siegel promised that it would make a profit. It would be very profitable for everybody, and they should do it. And Lansky ends up going to Chicago and New York, and they end up giving him money. One of the first issues or the first problems is that Benny Siegel makes Virginia Hill, his girlfriend, the project manager, and because of that, contractors were pretty slick, and they started robbing Benny Siegel and the mob. They basically would go to the work site at night, steal all the material, call Siegel, tell him it got ripped off, and in turn, Benny Siegel would say, okay, well, then I need more fucking drywall, and so he would buy it back from the very people that stole it from him. Also, because of the building boom in World War II, materials had become insanely expensive. So drywall, let's say you got a slice of drywall at like $3. Now it was $10. So it was a racket for these contractors. The original construction cost was slated to be about $1.5 million, but it had ballooned to over $6.5 million in a few months. The mob was fucking furious. The mob began to think that Bugsy Siegel was skimming the money that was meant to be used for the project. The delays didn't help either. And what happens is Meyer Lansky was asked to look into the matter, and what Lansky is able to find out is that Benny Siegel was sending Virginia Hill to Switzerland, Zurich, I believe it was, and she is depositing a ton of money every month into this Swiss bank account. Lansky sort of begins to think that Benny Siegel was stealing money from that account, and he also began to sort of think that maybe Benny Siegel knew he was going to get caught stealing, and therefore Benny Siegel's putting the money so that if he needs to flee, he has money in another country. At that point, Luciano had heard enough from Lansky and orders Siegel's death. The only reason why Siegel wasn't killed immediately was because Meyer Lansky spoke up to him and says, look, the club hasn't opened yet. Let's give it, it's going to open a few days. Let's give him a month, see what happens. And while Luciano did not rescind the death warrant, he offered a little time and space, and he basically orders Charlie Fischetti of Chicago to oversee the hit. Fischetti would then hand it over to Jack Dragna, who then would hand it over to Frankie Carbo, who was a Lucchese-made guy, and ultimately Siegel would be killed by Carbo in a hail of gunfire, I think just a few weeks later, and a lot of that was because as the Flamingo opened, it completely failed. It would be, I believe, 2.5 months before they ever saw a profit. Ultimately, in the end, the mob will lose control of Cuba when Castro and his rebels take over. The mob gets expelled, and like I said, it's been said that Lansky lost over $400 million out of that. But the mob not only lost the casinos and gambling, but they lost billions of dollars because they could not use Cuba as a hub for the narcotics. They had to move stuff around, which made it more expensive. And it ended up creating a massive problem for the mob in general. Eventually, Vito Genovese ended up dropping a dime on Lucky Luciano, and we've talked about this before. And what Genovese was so pissed off that Luciano wouldn't give in, Genovese drops a dime to the American government and says, hey, look, this piece of shit cocksucker is fucking in Cuba. What the fuck are you going to do about it? And when the American government finds out about that, they contact Cuba and say, look, you got to get him the fuck out of Cuba. We don't even want him there. And I don't understand where the fuck the American government got off thinking they could control Cuba, but they kind of could, because at the time we were supplying goods, services, medical care, and rations to Cuba. And Cuba desperately needed medicine and the rations and everything else. So the American government says, unless you fucking kick him the fuck out of your country, fuck you, we're not going to give you anything. And Cuba's got no choice, and they end up throwing Lucky Luciano the fuck out of Cuba. And that essentially ends whatever leverage and whatever power Lucky Luciano had in this country. And as we know, as a result of that, then Vincent the Chin Gigante pulls gets Vinny, then Vito Genovese gets Vinny the Cingigante to pull a gun on Costello, tries to blow his head off. He fucks that up. Costello ends up saying, fuck this noise, and allows Genovese to take over. But it would be Gambino, Genovese, and Luciano, Luciano, and Costello that would get even with Genovese for what he did. And I'm not saying which one did this, but I know that they were all three complicit in dropping a dime on Vito Genovese for moving massive shipments of narcotics through Texas. Vito Genovese shows up one night to eye his product, and he's surprised when the lights go on and there's like 100 fucking agents there, and he gets arrested, and he ends up doing life in prison. He dies in prison, and I can assure you he was not happy about that. And that has created a lot of sort of, I don't want to say backlash, but a lot of questions as to, does that make Gambino a rat? Does that make fucking Luciano a rat? Does that make Genovese a rat? Well, here's the thing. If we go by its definition, a rat is anybody who says anything about anybody else to give themselves credence or power or leeway. Today we sort of look at it as a guy who's fucking involved in organized crime and goes and tells on everybody so he can get government absolution, collect a paycheck, and go about his life without ever serving a fucking day in jail. But if you even go back to the 30s, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, there were dirty cops that did the bidding of the mob. There were politicians that did the bidding of the mob. Mob guys were dropping dimes on other mob guys. They would feed information to a dirty cop to make sure that their rackets were protected. So I think the reality is we have to look at the time period and say, okay, Luciano dropping a dime and getting Genovese arrested. There's a big difference between Luciano getting Genovese arrested versus Genovese dropping a dime to the United States government and Luciano just gets thrown out of the country. It's sort of the same thing. I can't really draw a parallel between the two, saying one is more righteous than the other. I think a rat move is a rat move. I think if these guys are gangsters, they should have just killed each other. I mean, that's what gangsters do. But it's also the same argument I have when people say to me that John Gotti killed a boss. Well, Albert Anastasia got whacked by Genovese and Gambino. Masseria and Maranzano were set up by Lucky Luciano. So history always repeats itself, and these were things that were going on during those times. Is it a punk move by Luciano? Sure, but he was trying to get even for something that happened to him. And so it's a tit-for-tat move. I don't know how history is going to look back on that, but that was mainly the reason for the Havana Conference. And one of the other things that Luciano wanted to ensure was that American mob bosses did not put their fucking hands on drugs. You did not touch it with your hands. He felt like the Sicilians, the Corsicans should move it. They should bring it into the country. It shows up. Basically, we get it and we ship it back out. And that's what Luciano wanted because he felt like if American mob bosses touched it, it meant they were all going to go to jail. Obviously, if we look at that time period too, this is where Carmine Galante starts to get himself, and he basically took over the Canadian side of things. And we know how that ended up for Carmine Galante. And I think some of the beef between Costello and Galante went back to that meeting where, Costello was not in favor of drugs. He looked down on it. He didn't think it was a good idea. And Galante looks at him like, the fuck you kidding? I mean, we're talking about $1 billion fucking dollars. Are you out of your fucking mind? Are you fucking nuts? And I think that there was a friendship between Genovese and Galante. And so, this is one of these things in history that when you look back on it, that created a lot of stuff because the minute the mob loses Cuba, they get involved with Kennedy. Kennedy makes promises that if they help get Kennedy elected, he will storm with the fucking stormtroopers into fucking Cuba. He'll get rid of Castro, and the mob will go back to doing what they do, pushing drugs and the gambling. But Kennedy doesn't hold his end of the bargain. He fucks up the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then Bobby Kennedy starts his launch of Cosa Nostra, and everything was changed. Imagine, if you will, go back, if Fidel Castro is not successful with the rebels, ousting Batista. I don't think the mob ever leaves Cuba. I think even today you would still see them there. And then what if Kennedy succeeded in getting rid of Fidel Castro? Do you really think that John F. Kennedy was going to allow the mob to go back to Cuba and establish operations there? Do you think that Bobby Kennedy, knowing that he went right against his brother and attacked the mob, Do you think that there would have been a beef between Kennedy and his brother over that? I mean, what would that have meant for Joe Kennedy? So there's very interesting things that we can sort of digest from this whole thing, is that if the mob was able to retain Cuba and hold on to Cuba, what would they look like today? They would fucking be a hell of a lot wealthier. And I think ultimately they would have branched out to the Bahamas. They would have branched out to Europe. They would have branched out everywhere. And I think they probably would have become what is closer resemblance to Ndrangheta today, to be honest with you. But we're never going to know because they lost Cuba. Kennedy fucked them. And they really never recovered from it. They recovered in other ways by, with construction and bookmaking, racketeering and extortion and the unions. But really, that whole chapter in the history of the mob fucked everything up. It fucked everything up. And we're never going to know what could have been different. And that's why the Havana Conference is so integral to the history of the mob. Because you can play it a bunch of different ways. But we're never going to know. Never going to know. So, all that being said, we are going to end it for this week. Next week, we will be back with a biography on a mobster with another large Q&A. And God willing, half of you won't have fucking coronavirus. Anyway, stay safe out there. I'm sure that a lot of stores and stuff are going to be closing. Just be safe. Look after your families. And, I know a lot of people are going to be stuck at home. And I'm going to be stuck at home as well. So I'm going to keep bringing the shows. In the meantime, if you have any questions or any show ideas or something you want to hear while you're either at home suffering from not being able to go outside or whatever the case may be, shoot me a message. You can check us out on Mob Talk Radio. Type it in on Facebook. Give us a like, subscribe, whatever. We're over on YouTube. Underneath this show's description, I will send you the link to the merchandise store where we got T-shirts. We got stickers, we got coffee mugs, we got all kinds of shit. So if those are sort of the things you're looking for, so be it. If you're interested in the mob art that we got, contact me. A lot of people have complained that they don't know how to get in contact with me about the mob art that we have. All you got to simply do is inbox me on Facebook. Go to Mob Talk Radio and message me, and then, we'll work out the details there if that's what you want to do. In the meantime, be safe, be good to each other, and by all means, try not to get fucking sick.